Okay, hello everyone. I hope you enjoyed that jazzy little tune while we were waiting for folks to join us today. Welcome to Aon's Chats from Home. I am Virginia Brown, Aon's Chief Transformation Officer, and I'd love to know who else is joining us. So please say hello by tapping in the chat window. Make sure you select a chat to all panelists and attendees. Tell us your name and how you're connected to Aon. I see Lisa and Jared and Ben and who else? Katie. Welcome, folks. So glad you're here. As we begin, we respectfully acknowledge that Aon properties are located on land traditionally stewarded by Indigenous people, land steeped in history and tradition as part of the treaty lands and territories of the Anishinaabe and Dakota nations. We acknowledge the painful history of colonization and genocide. We respect and advocate for Native American communities' connection to this land. This acknowledgement is a starting point. It is one part of Aon's work to honor the history of Indigenous communities and invest in the present and future prosperity of Native people. We celebrate the thriving and vibrant culture of Minnesota's Indigenous communities. Now, I know you're all excited to hear from Eric, but before we do that, I want to start by thanking our generous sponsor for today's event, U.S. Bank. Thank you so much for helping make this happen. We're so grateful for your support. It makes homes affordable in the Twin Cities, and I'm so glad it's enabling all of us to be together today. And thanks to all of you who are joining us and supporting this important work. Together, we're making sure more families can afford their homes. If you'd like to add your support, I have to say it, you can make a gift at aon.org/donate right now. Okay, so here's how this is going to work if you've never been on one of our chats from home before. I have a list of questions in front of me that were submitted in advance. After that, I'll feed your questions to Eric from the Q&A. So please enter any questions you have in the Q&A section. Unfortunately, I'm unable to track the chat, so I'll just be responding to the Q&A. That multitasking is a bit too much for me. If you end up having any technical issues, you can put that in the chat. Other Aon team members will respond to you there. So I hope we'll have time to get to all the questions you have today, but we'll have to see. Any questions that aren't answered, someone from the Aon team will follow up with you if you've made sure to include your name and contact info with your question. Okay, that's enough logistics. It's time. I'd like to welcome Dr. Eric Anthony Johnson, Aon's president and CEO. I know he's looking forward to chatting with all of you. Welcome, Eric.
All right, thank you, Virginia, and thanks everybody for joining today. Really appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. And this month, you hit your first full year as president and CEO of Aon. Congratulations. It's been great fun working with you this year. It's already been quite a ride, in my opinion. And also, a year isn't really that long. Many of the folks on the call might not have met you yet. So before we jump into the full Q&A, can you please just introduce yourself and tell us what brings you to this work?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Virginia. So yes, I'm Dr. Eric Anthony Johnson, President and CEO at Aon. And, I often say this to everybody, there's not much distinction between who I am as a person and what I do for a living. What brings me to this work is just my sheer desire to help address this affordable housing challenge. And truthfully, as far as I'm concerned, there's no better organization in the Twin Cities, state of Minnesota, or probably in the Midwest that I could have joined other than Aon. So that combination, and plus my personal story around affordable housing, really brought me to this job.
Awesome. You mentioned your personal story. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, my personal story. I grew up in New Orleans, originally from New Orleans. What's interesting, though, is people don't notice about me. I have family origins going back to the 1960s here in the Twin Cities. I had family that moved up in the 1960s into North Minneapolis. But my story is really, I moved about 18, 19 times before I turned 18 years old. Having that experience really sort of imprinted in my brain, really working as hard as I can to understand those issues that cause those situations to happen for me and my family, and really just helped me become more of an expert in terms of what I do.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that with us, Eric. Okay, so first real question. I've heard you speak to your priorities about the future of Aon, and I'm sure we'll get into a lot of that today. But first, I know that one priority is more support for our existing properties. Can you say more about that? What are the needs and what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, great question. So when you think about sort of the history of Aon, Aon has done a great job over the years acquiring properties. In doing so, working to preserve what's already in place and try not to lose. But what that has done for us is to really help us understand we need to move to a different sort of cycle. That cycle is about preserving what we have and working at ways to get capital infusion into our existing properties to stabilize what we have. So our work going forward will be heavily about stabilizing our existing portfolio and working to make sure we have conditions in our properties that everybody can be proud of.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Okay, well, where should we start? Maybe let's start, session is going right now. So our legislators for the state of Minnesota are busy at work and we have a huge surplus. Can you talk a little bit about how you'd like to see those dollars spent this year?
Well, personally, I just like the legislature to just give it all to Aon and we can do what we need to do. That would be the perfect scenario. But here's where we're focusing, guys. NOAA acquisition, there is supporting the governor's budget, roughly 100 million plus around NOAA preservation. We're actively involved in that process. 4D tax legislation, which is really about tax reduction in properties in particular that are affordable to help those properties remain affordable. Third, and I don't know if a lot of people know this, but the pandemic has had a real powerful impact on organizations like Aon and others in terms of our mission. We've taken significant hits operationally, resource-wise, and we're working to try and secure some funding to help us stabilize our current operations along with others. Those four key pieces, along with the general concept of affordable housing, we will be there front and center to basically help. And let me take this opportunity just to say thank you for our residents that's been testifying at the legislature as well.
Yeah, we've seen some really amazing testimony from folks living in Aon homes. So that's great, Eric. You did mention NOAA, and just in case there are any folks on the call who don't know what that is, can you say a little bit more about what NOAA is?
Yes, NOAA is actually naturally occurring affordable housing. Those are multifamily complexes that date back to, let's say, the 60s, 70s, 80s, early 90s, that are really just affordable by the nature and age of those properties. So when I speak of NOAA, that's what I'm talking about.
Great. All right, so let's see. We have a question from Denise about how can community members assist with the goal of creating and preserving very affordable housing in their communities. She's specifically asking about Bloomington, but I think that could go for any of the cities that folks in the Twin Cities or in the state of Minnesota live in.
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's what I have to say about that. Voices have to be heard in terms of speaking about the importance of affordable housing. Too often, we get it sort of, I'm using the word twisted in terms of the narrative. So what people can really do is speak to the need and the importance of affordable housing, because all we're talking about is regular people trying to make their way every day through society. So I would say conversations with your local officials, state officials, even writing letters to say, hey guys, this is a serious issue. And everybody deserves a home. And I really think that's what we need to do more of.
That's great. And what a good question, Denise. Eric, in addition to being the president and CEO of Aon, has also worked in a variety of city administrations, so really knows how to manage that municipal level movement and building towards more housing. So Ben's asked an interesting question, and he has put a term in there that I have to admit I have not heard. So hopefully you've heard it, Eric. But he's asked if you could talk about gentle density. He's interested in your perspective on this trend and the advocacy role you play with it, if any. I can't say I know what gentle density is.
Well, when we think of density, we think of massive size and height. When you think about gentle density, you're talking about density that is more in alignment with community. So I think what he's really talking about is it's okay to be a mid-rise city that, let's say, your density cap is 4 or 5 or maybe 6 or whatever, but not really exceeding that. To me, the issue is about creativity in financial modeling to support concepts of gentle density throughout neighborhoods in cities, whether it's Twin Cities or beyond. So I don't think all cities have to accept and force the concept of density. I don't think that's the way you do it. I think you work with communities to figure out the scale that really works for them and align your strategies to meet that standard.
Have you seen any cities that do gentle density really well?
Well, I've seen cities around the country that through their zoning would cap height restrictions, but it's not slowing them down in terms of housing productions. Developers will basically meet the standard. They will figure it out. So it's not like if you don't do density, you won't get buildings or, in addition, affordable housing.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about the types of housing. Anne's asked a good question. What are your thoughts, Eric, about missing middle plans and how they're affecting the need and supply of truly affordable housing, affordable at 50% AMI and below? And maybe you can even speak a little bit to what that AMI means.
Yeah, let's talk about the missing middle. The challenge with the missing middle, and just kind of follow this logic, the challenge with the missing middle is the narrative of affordable housing. Because the way we speak about it, we don't talk about the middle. We only talk about the lower. And as a result, the middle is being left out, right? So when we're talking about area median incomes, we're talking about the range of about 80% of the area median income is probably that missing middle, right? Somewhere in that sort of balance. We will focus from, let's say, 30, 40, 50, 60s. We'll do some 80s. But we need the missing middle. And I'll be honest with you, the missing middle could actually drive more housing for the lower if we talk about it more from that perspective, because it's very simple. When you look at occupations and what people are paying in terms of their housing costs, you're going to look at regular people, from teachers, service workers, just regular people not being able to afford housing. But to me, part of the answer, in particular, as you're working into areas that are somewhat not familiar with affordable housing, you need to speak more to the missing middle.
Now, you said in that explanation, which was great, that we talk about the lowest income levels. Who is that we? Are you talking about Aon? Are you talking about legislators?
No, I'm talking about the system in general around the country. It doesn't matter, guys. You can go anywhere, and when you talk about it, it's going to always focus more on the low. I'm not saying the need is not there, but in order to get more support for the lower, we've got to talk about it at every level. That's what I'm referring to.
Right. So Jennifer's asked a pretty big question, but it's a good one. What do you see as the largest hurdle for more affordable housing?
At the Regional Council of Mayors about a month or so ago, I think I stunned everybody when that question was asked, and I said education. It's like, what? Education? I'm like, yeah. Well, it's not money. I'm like, no, it's not money. It's education. Let me tell you why. In order to get more production, we've got to break the narrative. The narrative is sort of like scaring people. If you want to penetrate areas in the suburbs or anywhere, you're going to have to talk about affordable housing where it makes people feel like it's okay. Everything else will start to follow after that, whether it's capital or it's regulations from cities. So I tend to stun people when I say that. That's what I really think it is. And as Aon, we're doing a lot of conversations with cities throughout the state of Minnesota, and we're doing more conversations about that. And you'll be surprised how we're starting to soften up some of that perspective. So that's what I would really say, because you take care of that, I think you can get all the capital and regulatory relief to do projects.
Great. And wouldn't that be nice?
It would be nice.
So we have an anonymous attendee who's curious about Aon's model and whether it could be reproduced at scale. Could the nation benefit more broadly from our Minnesota model in affordable housing?
Let me tell you where Aon, and it was attractive to me in taking the job, the space of naturally occurring affordable housing. Aon is the primary player in that space, not just in Minnesota, but if you look at across the country, we're actually leading in that space. So as a model, I would say Aon could be an example for others around the country that could work to preserve and acquire, in particular, when there are scenarios when families are getting ready to lose their homes. Aon has been the one that has stepped in. Have we have challenges? Yes, but we've had the fortitude to do it. Not many organizations around the country are willing to do that. So as a model in the Aon space, naturally occurring affordable housing, I think, would be one of those areas.
That's great. And that actually follows really great into another question Ben asked about what makes Aon distinctive in the nonprofit affordable housing area, maybe compared to some of our other wonderful peers in the community like Beacon Interfaith Collaborative or Common Bond Housing. You mentioned Noah. Is there anything else that you think really sets Aon apart?
Aon has sort of a, it has a no fear mentality. And let me tell you what that means. Aon has never been risk adverse to taking on challenges. Some people will go to the line and stop and say, oh, well, that's too much for us to take on. We're not going to do it. Aon has sort of been a single focus in that space of willing to take a risk. That makes us different because those other organizations, they won't do it. They will say, hey, whoop, sorry, that's not in our area. We won't do it. So, and I can just tell you guys personally, that was really attractive to me in terms of coming to take the job because I didn't want to be in a place where you're doing the same thing over and over.
That's great. And our CFO might have my hide if I didn't mention, of course, these are calculated risks.
Yeah, calculated risk. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's turn it a little bit to talk more about the residents. Can you say a little bit about what, in your first year here, what are you hearing from Aon's current residents and how does that inform your priorities?
Yeah, let me say first, though, I look at this from the lens of a resident first and foremost, because I come from that world. And I can tell you that whether it's been time spending walking properties, talking to residents, or seeing residents at meetings where discussions are taking place around a housing issue, here's what I've basically found. There's some really good people living in our properties. And I don't say that just to say there's good people living on our properties. I think it's really the truth. I have never seen a case where the residents have been sort of disruptive and not being seen as valuable assets to the property. And that makes me want to do more to help the residents. And that's why when we talk about what we want to do, it's centered around stabilizing our property so we can do more for our residents. So I would tell you guys, we have a great set of residents. I wish we can do more in terms of propping up what they stand for and what they believe in.
Love it. All right, folks, I'm still going through some questions, but we'll probably have some time for some more. So if you have a question for Eric, please put it in the Q&A. Okay, let's see. We've already talked about the legislature, which is great. And I actually just met with a legislator today to talk about our priorities. What would you say are some of the biggest obstacles for Aon and for affordable housing right now?
Well, that's a great question. The world has changed dramatically since the pandemic. And arguably some of the biggest obstacles is really adjusting to what I'm calling the new world. What that means is doing more with less, having to be more creative in what you're doing. Number three, constantly fighting against the resistance that doesn't see affordable housing as a valuable issue in our communities. So when I talk about those three, I think that's really the biggest challenges. I don't think for us and others, it's going to be about finding locations to do good projects. That's not going to be it. It's going to be being able to sort of ride the wave of these constant challenges we're having, in particular coming out of the pandemic.
Cool. Well, and then speaking about the challenges of coming out of the pandemic for our residents, many of our residents are at the very low income levels at 30, 20, or even 10% AMI. We've got a great question, I think, from Lynn. Do you see a path for folks at those earning those lowest incomes to be first-time homeowners? Do you see any work happening in that vein?
home ownership, well, we all know it's the ultimate in terms of the American dream. The biggest challenge we face in that space, I'm not going to say it's land costs and all of those things. I think that it's about finding alignment with partners that really understand it's okay to produce housing at a cost and not to worry so much about maximizing profits. That sounds counter to America, but what I'm saying is the gap financially needed. Let's take African Americans in the Twin Cities. Average income is about 25, 28,000. The cost of housing on average 300 something thousand, for a new single family home. The gap to get there is tremendous. The resources available to close that gap is very slim. So to do it, you're going to have to think about some creative ways, working with cities, utilizing their land, using some development tools, first-time home buyers programs, things that need to try and chop away at the cost to do it. But I do think it's part of, and it should be part of the sort of continuum of housing.
That's great. And Linda also asked, do you see like subsidies, think of a Section 8 voucher or something like that being part of that solution or not?
Yeah, actually currently Section 8 vouchers can be used towards home ownership. So if you have a voucher and your voucher is covering, let's say, I don't know, $1,500, $1,800 a month, the voucher holder is paying the difference. The voucher can actually be used to support home ownership. Still have a gap there, but it basically will help lower that sort of gap. So yes, it could be.
That's great. And I know we also have some really strong community land trust organizations in town, and that's another way to sort of step into the home ownership world for folks who are earning lower incomes. Yep. All right. So let's see. Do you think Aon would ever consider creating a home buying program? And this is coming from CJ, one of our board members, actually, who's also a resident.
All right, CJ, good question. Here's what I would say. You know what? I would say yes. And I'll tell you why. We talked about this a little bit. We don't necessarily have to build the houses, but we've got 17,000 residents living in our properties that could be in a position to transition to home ownership. How do we link with a partner that's doing first-time home buyers and building housing at the right price point? We could definitely do that.
Cool. Let's see. So, well, when we talk about sort of where people are living, and certainly Aon homes are all over. I think we're in 15 municipalities around the Twin Cities. But Bonnie's asking why more affordable housing isn't built in the suburbs.
Well, let me use the concept of land use. You have to go back to zoning. Suburbs are predominantly zoned single family, right? And if you look at that as the foundational piece of the suburbs, that gives you sort of the quicker answer as to why more housing has not been built in the suburbs. However, I can tell you this, based on our conversations with cities, there is a growing interest in the suburbs to do more, and Aon will look to do more in the suburbs. But the simple answer is in the zoning, land use zoning, single family, predominant setup for zoning.
Yeah. And then I think we circle back to your point earlier about talking to your local city council, talk to your local city administrators about those zoning rules that might be prohibiting some of the multifamily kind of apartment rentals.
That's right.
Cool. Well, and Donovan's here. Hi, Donovan. And he's asking about more information on our efforts around NOAA preservation in the Twin Cities. What do we have planned in the future?
Yeah, so we will continue to explore NOAA acquisitions, and we can probably write a book or dissertation or case study on NOAA acquisitions. So for us, as we look at NOAA acquisitions, we want to make sure we are going to acquire properties that, one, can preserve, two, doesn't come with so much on the capital need side of the equation. So for us, we will continue on that road of exploring NOAA acquisitions.
Cool. All right, I'm just scrolling through to see if we have questions that sort of relate to that. Well, so as long as we're talking about the future, Luis, hello, Luis, has asked, what do you envision for the future of the Twin Cities in the next 10 years as it relates to housing?
Well, the Twin Cities in general, um, let me put it to you guys like this. If you do your research, you'll see that 90% of all affordable housing in the Twin Cities over the last, I don't know, decade or so have been produced through low-income housing tax credits. And what that means is the state can do its part, but we're going to have to look at creative ways to do more. So I think the future of the Twin Cities is going to have to be about doing tax credits, doing NOAAs, but looking at other ways to also incentivize to do projects to really ramp up the pace of production. Housing costs will continue to go up. The question is, and I think everybody on the call knows this, incomes are not keeping pace with housing costs. So I think the future is going to have to be about how do we bring additional private capital in at the right price point that we could utilize, we being the whole system of housing to help produce more and more units. So, however, I do think the future is in the suburbs. People would say, well, Dr. Johnson, why would you say that? It has to be in the suburbs. We just can't say Minneapolis, St. Paul, we're going to put everything in those cities. So I think the future is going to be in terms of expansion into the suburbs and beyond.
And to that end, are you feeling optimistic about the future? And if so, why?
I feel very optimistic. I feel very optimistic about the future. At Aon, we're riding this wave of a set of challenges that we and others have been facing coming out of the pandemic. I'm confident that we will come out of this sort of wave because what I believe is on the other side is the opportunity to do more and more housing. So I feel really good about it. I'm really excited about it. I think the team knows every time I talk about it, what's on the other side. You can't see over my hand, but what's on the other side, I believe is opportunity. And we are going to be in a position to take advantage of that. And that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, well, and I certainly agree. And I have to say that I am personally very inspired by your optimism about our ability to face this challenge. So I think that's really cool. In terms of sort of the challenge that Minnesota and the Twin Cities specifically is facing, are there other parts of the country where, you know, you're seeing success in their models that maybe we could learn from?
Here's where I think we can learn from. You know, the Twin Cities and Minnesota has this dual thing going on. It has some of the best economic indicators, at the same time has some of the worst economic indicators. I think where the opportunity lies is adding to what the state is doing. We tend to focus heavily on the state. We need to start adding more from the private sector because this is a community. When I say community, I'm talking about the Twin Cities and state of Minnesota with gargantuan private sector capabilities. And I think we have to tap into that like they're starting to do in other cities such as Dallas, Charlotte, Washington, D.C., Detroit, Seattle. How do we look at some of those things and bring it to bear here in the Twin Cities and beyond?
Yeah, and there's certainly some creative stuff happening all over. Like I feel like the tiny home movement, maybe it's in Austin, has gotten a lot more traction there, but also it's a lot warmer there. So maybe that's a part of the consideration.
Yep.
Cool. So it's very interesting to think about what we can learn from others because we need all the ideas we can get. I know that. Let's see. Oh, here's a great question from Jared. Do we ever take a census of our resident population? Like, how do we get input from them?
Yeah, actually, I think we do a good job engaging with our residents. Can we do more? Absolutely. I think the nature of the greater engagement, getting more from the residents, is not so much like a census, but what should and could be done to make the case that their experience is worth talking more about in terms of affordable housing. So in other words, just not collecting demographic information, but ideas that can influence policy, that can influence regulation, that can influence administrative thinking when it comes to supporting housing. Because guess what, guys? Some of the things that's being done may not necessarily be a benefit to the residents. So knowing that, getting that sort of information cataloged and shared, I think could go a long way in terms of shaping policy, both at the state, local, and hopefully the national level.
Yeah. That's great. And of course, we do have an annual survey. We call it our home score survey, where we try to get input from every single resident living in an Aon home. But the more housing we get, which is what we need, lots more housing, the harder it is to kind of do that work. So we're trying to think through how to get all that input in. So if any of y'all listening have great ideas, please let us know. And sort of still on the residents, Rachel has a great question. Can you talk more, Eric, about the resident services that we provide to our residents and how we're helping ensure residents maintain their housing and are stable in their housing?
Yeah, that's a great question. We, through contractual relationships with service providers, we provide a range of services through these relationships. And depending on the population, if you are like transitioning from homelessness, there's services that will sort of match your criteria there. And in some cases, there's services for people who are just really, working their way through the economic ladder. But I can tell you this, there is no sort of like one cookie cutter set of services that's really needed, because even in our naturally occurring affordable housing, properties we own, while those are not developments that come with services, we know there are individuals and families that can use some services. So for us, it's really a range. It'll probably take me the whole session to talk about the range. It could be from, just support for mental services help, economic help, family, additional for housing support. So it's really just a broad spectrum.
And also to that end, like, how do you feel like Aon's residents are doing? I mean, are we post-pandemic? I mean, where are they today, given the really hard last 3 years we've had?
Well, I don't think it's a secret that a lot of residents struggle to pay rent during the pandemic, and in that period. And Aon did a Herculean job in terms of raising additional dollars to help the residents, because you guys remember there was a Minnesota rent relief, which basically ended abruptly, and it really put residents sort of in a really strange situation. So I think we have residents, and if you talk to them, they will tell you, a lot of them will tell you they've been appreciative of what Aon has done to help them remain in their homes. We're not an organization that's going to just cut you off immediately. We'll do everything in our power to basically work with you. So I would say our residents would be appreciative of what's been done to date, which I don't think a lot of people really know the scale of what we've done.
Yeah, it was a lot of work for everyone to get through the pandemic. And I think we saw really resilient staff members. We saw really resilient residents, everybody helping each other to get through it, which was cool to see, although unfortunate we had to experience it to see it. In terms of who our residents are, do we provide housing for folks who struggle with substance abuse, and how does that work, and how do they get the support, the extra support they might need?
Yeah, for us, we usually work through Hennepin County, in particular, coordinated entry program. That's where a lot of our residents are coming from, that are usually getting services provided to them to help them with, substance abuse, any sort of mental health challenges, things of that nature. But by and large, we have just like a lot of just regular residents, just regular people getting up in the morning, going to work, in terms of their jobs.
Mm-hmm. And what about, do we have many seniors in our housing?
We have seniors. We have it at basically at every level you can think of, from seniors down to the youngest of the young. We have the range of residents living in our properties.
Great. Let's see. So we've got some more questions. Oh, there's one other point I think that's interesting to make when we're talking about our residents. I know that you mentioned that we've had some residents speaking to our legislators this year. Can you talk a little bit more about how they're engaged in our policy work and in systems change?
Yeah, we have, not only have we provided, I want to say it's really through our Speakers Bureau, where people will call and ask Aon in particular, do you have residents who could speak to an issue related to housing? And of course we do. So it could be us, or it could be another entity asking to have someone come from Aon to speak on a housing issue. And our residents have responded affirmatively on that front. Matter of fact, on this a couple of weeks ago, we had a resident testify before one of the housing committees. So we do a lot of that, and we hope that hearing from residents can influence policy. And I can tell you this, there's more testimony to come, and legislators sometimes don't want to hear from like us as developers. They want to hear from the people who are really being impacted. So for us, our residents really provide that opportunity. And we don't do anything like forcing residents to do it. We don't go and say, you must testify. These are individuals that emerge and they want to be able to talk about the experience in terms of housing and everything they're dealing with.
Yeah, that's great. And they certainly, I know I've seen a few of the residents give testimony, and it is really powerful. Well, while we're still speaking about some of the policy issues, rent control has been in the news a lot over the last year. What do you think about that? Does it have merits?
Well, let me say this, guys. If housing costs match the reality of what people are making in terms of income, there is no discussion taking place related to rent control. So think about that for a minute, right? If the two are in alignment, incomes and housing costs, there is no discussion. So it's one of those issues that, let me just say this, rent control is part of a larger issue that's happening in our society right now. It is wrapped into this context of enormous inequality. So you can't separate a discussion on rent control away from everything that's happening around inequality, of which housing costs is one of them.
Cool. Well, another anonymous question here, and they've asked something that I know is a little bit of a thing of yours, so I think you're going to enjoy this question. But they've asked to explain the market and how that is a myth of investors, how there isn't a market. And I know you love to off on this.
That's a great question. There is no such thing as the single market. So you guys probably hear this all the time. Developers, whoever, will go to a city council and say, well, the market can't support this. There's no such thing as a single market. We talk about it as a single market, but there's levels of the market. One developer's market may be higher income individuals. Another developer may have a market of an affordable product. Both are part of the market. So when you talk about education, you're talking to city council members, I often do a lot of work to help them understand that in terms of there's no such thing as the market. So when you guys hear the use of that word, just think about it and say, wait a minute, the market? Let me break this thing down a little further and think about it. Let me just say this, guys. The average household income for all Americans across the country is only $65,000. That's a huge market. But some people won't speak to that market because their market may be individuals making over $100,000 a year. So that's a great question. I can probably write a dissertation, a book on that, because I love talking about that, because I think it's a gross miseducation in terms of how we talk about it.
And I've got to ask, Eric, are you typing in anonymous questions while we're doing this? Because that was like so keyed up just for, I know that's a topic you love to go through.
No. I just said that I have a problem when people say that, and I just keep myself under control. That's all.
Good. Well, as long as we're doing some educating, land trusts were mentioned before, and we got a couple of questions. Can you talk a little bit more about how land trusts work and if that's a growing trend and sort of what it could mean for affordable housing?
Yeah, so land trust basically takes land and to ensure that that land is used for affordable housing in perpetuity, whether it's for home ownership or for multifamily development. It's really that simple. Piece of land, deed restricted in perpetuity to ensure that current and future housing on that site remains affordable. And is it a good model? Absolutely, it's a good model to use. We probably should do it more, but I think you need more public entities acquiring land and converting land into the land trust model to help produce.
Mm-hmm. And I know the Twin Cities Community Land Trust is a partner with us. You mentioned the 4D tax legislation that we're working on this year. And while 4D tax legislation might not mean a lot to folks, it just means taxing affordable housing less than is currently being taxed. And the land trusts are included in that as well. So if we pass that that legislation, it will also support the land trust entities in the state, which would be really.
That is correct.
So there's also another model of affordable housing, not necessarily one that Aon participates in, but the cooperative ownership model. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means for affordable housing?
Yeah, it's funny. Someone called me a couple of days ago, last week, asking about cooperative housing. So imagine whether it's a single family product or a multifamily product. The cooperative model simply just allows individuals through the financing structure to become owners of their property, right? You tend to see it a lot in more condo conversions and in single family development, not so much in like just say a multifamily building. That's kind of tougher. It's tougher to do it that way, but mostly in condo conversions and in single family production.
Mm-hmm. And I know we've seen a bit of that in manufactured home parks as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So there are a few questions here that kind of get to what can the folks who are joining us today do to impact affordable housing? So how would you say an individual community member could get engaged and help make an impact so that we get more housing?
You know, you guys heard me talk about the narrative. And let me just tell you a quick super story. I was in Bloomington at Starbucks, getting my coffee, and this young lady asked me what I do. I said, "Oh yeah, I work for Aon. We're working on some, building affordable housing." And she said, "Wow, those people need housing. Wow, that's a great thing you're doing." And I said, "Well, but what do you do for a living?" She said, "Well, I'm a school teacher." And I said, "So do you have like roommates? What's the case?" She said, "No, it's just me. And I said, "Wow, that's interesting because you are actually in this realm of who we're talking about. But we don't hear that because the narrative is so screwed up." Here's what I would really say. When speaking to community members, neighborhood associations, cities, whatever, we have to talk differently about it. Because when you look at occupations, the occupations are not paying enough to afford housing costs. So it's not who we think it is. I tend to say that a lot because I think that is where the biggest benefit is really impacting the ability to create affordable housing. So not like I'm saying go to the city, you want more capital. Yes, okay. But that piece right there, guys, is the center point of why we have a problem in terms of moving the needle forward because it's so skewed in terms of how we talk about it. Well, then secondly, affordable housing is arguably a huge economic impact to your local community. We don't talk about that. We do talk about what these projects do for the community. People think they are detractors when in fact they're really not. Everything from, I'm gonna be technical here, from multipliers related to jobs, to materials, supplies, all of this comes with the production of affordable housing. So thinking about it and talking about it more like that makes it more human in the sense that it's not something to be afraid of.
That's great. I think you're right that individuals can have a lot of impact on what is the narrative around affordable housing, what it is and what it isn't. We know that we hear a lot about NIMBYism, which is not in my backyard. So yes, we love affordable housing. But not my neighborhood.
Or just ask your local city council person when a project comes before them for approval to have a slide showing occupations in terms of who's going to be living in those developments. And it's going to be a stunner to see who the people are. So,
yeah. Well, and then Jared had another idea to piggyback on how individuals can get involved. Do you have any thoughts on micro investments from large groups of folks to help fund the private sector portion of building new housing?
Yeah, just imagine if that microfinancing took off. So let's use I'm gonna use crowdfunding as a micro strategy. That's not out of the question. It could actually be done. It's not being done, significantly like in housing, but it could be done. Individuals could, from a community perspective, say, "Oh wow, we're gonna do a micro investment," or I'm making it up. "We're gonna raise $5 million for this project that's gonna do X." Absolutely, that could happen. And let me tell you the story. In Bloomington, when I worked in Bloomington, we created our trust fund. Our first contribution of $50,000 or so came from an individual.
Hmm.
It wasn't from anywhere else that seeded the fund. So it can be done.
Awesome. Well, Jared, I didn't plant that question. I am not also typing in questions, but Jared has just opened the door. You know, anyone who wants to help us fund housing with a big check, just let us know. Eric is happy to take that call.
Yep, I'll take that call.
Um, so I have a great question from Kurt. You know, we were talking about the 4D tax legislation, and he had a clarifying question. So we mentioned that tax is about taxing affordable apartment homes less. Does that include even if they're held by private for-profit people or organizations?
Actually, yes, it is, as long as it's benefiting the preservation and development of affordable housing. So yes.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think the 4D coalition that we're a part of, as well as our nonprofit friends at Common Bond and Project for Pride in Living, also includes some of the for-profit developers. I think there are 18 of us total, all of whom are providing a lot of thousands of homes for folks who earn low incomes. So speaking of that, so that's one time when we're in a private nonprofit partnership. What other kind of partnerships are you seeking, Eric, to increase Aon's impact and effectiveness?
Yeah, I should have talked about this earlier. We're going to be looking to partner more with private developers. So Aon can team up with private developers looking to do projects together. And I won't say anything on the call, but we are actively working on 2 of those potential types of relationships now, because again, we have to be creative in terms of what we do. We just can't say, well, here's the only bucket we operate in. How do we do some pivoting in relationships with private development firms as well?
Great. You know, Dwayne's asked an interesting question, so he must be a bit of an insider. Dwayne, I'm not sure if you and I have met, but he's asking if we're a member of NeighborWorks. Eric, can you talk a little bit about what NeighborWorks is and whether or not we're a member?
Oh yeah, we are definitely one of the most respected members in NeighborWorks. So NeighborWorks is a nationwide sort of, let's call it a community development intermediary, where they do everything from capacity building to lending to everything you think about. And we are actively involved with NeighborWorks. We recently sent a core of our staff from resident services out to Charlotte for a 2 or 3 day sort of resident services training session with NeighborWorks in Charlotte. So we probably speak to them at least once a week, I would say. So we're very close to NeighborWorks, and they are actually one of our biggest supporters.
Mm-hmm. And I think there are maybe something like 250 or 300 organizations across the country that are members. So it's not a small group, but also not a huge book. Group. Sorry, I said the word book because I just noticed a comment from Lynn when you were talking about the stories from our Aon residents. She suggested we put that in a book. That would be amazing. So yes to a book, just so that you know.
Yep.
Okay, so we are getting close to time. So now's your moment if you have any last questions. Land trust has come up again. Rather than totally go sideways on that, I just want to clarify that Aon doesn't operate any land trusts. There are some land trust entities in the Twin Cities who are doing great work. They are friends of ours, but we're not doing that work. So Eric, you've just hit a year. What has surprised you the most about your time at Aon so far?
Here's what has surprised me the most. It's just a series of issues that's hitting us organizationally all at one time. And these are things you can't really plan for. I definitely didn't see them coming in, but it's just a series of things coming out of the pandemic, combination of social unrest, eviction moratoriums, safety issues, all of the stuff hitting like at one time. Individually, these issues are tough by themselves, but all of this stuff happening at the same time, right? That right there is well, something I didn't see coming. A lot of people didn't see coming, but we're committed to working through all of this stuff and riding this wave to creating a even stronger Aon in the future. So that's what I really see in my first year, because you can't like see these things, but these things are a result of a series of forces all hitting all at.
Well, and so if that's what you've seen in your first year, I want to put you on the spot about Aon's future. What do you think needs to happen this next year? And then what do you see Aon being in 10 years?
Yeah, I think here's what I really see. Aon over the next 24 months is working to reposition itself, to navigate some of these challenges I talked about, but that's also looking at how we become stronger as an organization. We've been working on our strategic plan, but there's also a realization that we're going to have to do some pivoting from our strategic plan because things have been changing so fast. So I see the next 12, 24 months, Aon really working to become a more nimble organization. What I see on the other side is Aon really ramping up its production and preservation. I say to people, I don't think we're going to have a challenge. We're not going to have a problem finding new developments to build and or preserve. The question is going to be, how can we ride this wave and get prepared for what I think is on the other side? And I'm talking about from north, south, east, and west in the state of Minnesota. So the team is doing a great job communicating with communities and partners at every stretch of the imagination. But here's what I also see. Aon has done some things to help strengthen the system of affordable housing in Minnesota and the Twin Cities. What I mean by that, Aon is taking some steps right now to do something that nobody's really done in terms of looking outside the box at some different ideas. And with those ideas, I started out by saying Aon has never been afraid of risk. That means somebody has to take the lead and do some things that others are afraid to do. We're going to be doing those things while doing what we've always done well, with the hopes that we will be producing and preserving, as much as humanly possible over the next, 10 years and beyond.
That's great. Well, and as you're completing your first year here, and coming on the tail of Ellen Arthur, who was our president and CEO for over 30 years, y'all have very different styles. You're both incredibly knowledgeable about the space, and you're both really into challenging the status quo. And I think that's been a really amazing thing for Aon to see continued on in your leadership.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Go ahead.
Yeah. Besides, why would you want to do the same thing over and over? The same. I don't know about anybody on the call, but I'm not excited about, just doing the same thing. I just get kind of, I start to melt like the witch in the Wizard of Oz. I start to melt when you start saying, we have to do what we've always been doing. I'm like, okay, fine. We'll do some of that, but we'll pivot and find new ways as well.
I mean, you teed this up. I can't be the only one now wishing that you would do that whole imitation. I'm like, melting. Come on.
Yep.
Brought it up. All right. Well, next time we all see Eric in person, we're going to have him do the Wicked Witch melting scene, because I would like to see that. And on that note, thank you, Eric, for all of this amazing conversation. We are sadly at the end of this time together.
Yep.
For all of those who joined us, thank you so much for being here and for your great questions. We covered a lot of topics around housing, and I love how this conversation kind of explored every little bit of it.
Yep.
Your support of Aon and the affordable homes is critical for our community. And of course, Eric, thank you for your thoughtful responses and eagerness just to put yourself out there and answer any questions that come your way. And of course, for those of you, as we say goodbye, we always need your support. So gifts made today will go to support the plans you just heard about to save and build more affordable homes in our community and do more and more and more, as Eric has said. You can donate at aon.org/donate. Okay, that's all we have for you. I hope everyone has a great afternoon and good luck with Snowmageddon if you're here in the Twin Cities. We'll see you all next time. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, bye.